You're listening to LibraryCast, brought to you by Somerset Libraries. And on this week's LibraryCast, I'm delighted to welcome Rosie Inge, who is a volunteer at the Wells Literary Festival for 2020. Rosie, welcome to LibraryCast.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to actually see that hopefully, with all fingers crossed, there are plans for a literary festival. Tell us how difficult it has been planning this year's festival with so many, shall we say, hurdles to jump over.
It has been, I think, probably the biggest challenge that most of us have had in our entire lives. Luckily, we've got a very, very efficient lady, Frances Rowe, who is in charge of the event and is sorting out all the technology and all that sort of thing. But we started planning it as we usually do at the end of the last one, inviting speakers to come and talk. And then lockdown happened and coronavirus happened, and we absolutely didn't know what we were going to be able to do, but it was a long time hence, so we thought, well, maybe it'll be over by then. So we continued the planning, and we got closer and closer and closer when we really had to make a decision, because we had to produce the brochure, we had to start selling the tickets and everything else. So we decided to go a hybrid event. And so we are at Cedars Hall, which is the most wonderful venue for this. It's been fantastic for the last 2 years. This is our third year there. And we're going to have a live event, but we're only able to have 90 people as opposed to 300 plus. And we're going to do live streaming at the same time. We've got 4 authors of the 33 who didn't want to catch public transport and come down. So we're streaming from their bedrooms or studies or wherever they want to be into a big screen in Cedars Hall. So everyone can come to see whichever event they want to in the hall. And if they can't get tickets, they can do it live streaming into their own homes.
I asked Rosie to give us a little flavour of what we can expect at the 2020 Wells Literary Festival.
We've got Gina Miller, who I think is absolutely amazing this year. We've got a Somerset Wildlife Trust event. Tom Bradby, the handsome ITV newscaster. We've got a guy called Adam Kucharski, who I think will be absolutely riveting, who's written about contagion, which is really timeless. Carolyn Steele is writing about how food can save the world. And then to end up, we've got Boris's sister, Rachel, who promises to talk about all sorts of things about her brother. We've got history, biography, science, politics, poetry, novels. Yeah, it's amazing. We run these competitions, a poetry competition and a short story and a book for children. And we do have entries to the competition from all around the world. And this year we've had an amazing, we've beaten the 1,000 mark, and we increased the prize to £1,000 for the winner of that. Last year, Simon Armitage, the poet laureate, he was the judge of the poetry competition. He was unable to come at the last minute, so he's coming this year. So it's all very good.
So I noticed that he will be at the festival on the 22nd of October. Big supporter of libraries as well as books in general, and the poet laureate. And a musician. He's just brought an album out as well. And he's been talking about his book, Magnetic Field, the Marsden Poems. Will he be talking about life and being a poet laureate in general, or just specifically on his book?
I think it'll cover everything, because normally the talks go on for 20 minutes or so. Sometimes the speakers overrun, but then we have another 20 minutes of questions from the audience. So he can talk about anything you want to know. So log in, be there, and have your questions ready. It's going to be quite complicated because the questions will first of all come from members of the audience, but we also want to include questions from people who are watching it at home. And the live streaming, we decided to do that for all the events.
I wanted to find out more about the story and the history of the Wells Literary Festival, so I asked Rosie.
It started 28 years ago with, I think, 3 ladies who went to the Cheltenham Festival, which has been going for a long time. And they said, why can't we do something like that in Wells? So they did. They started inviting writers down who absolutely adored it, came to Wells, and it grew and it grew and it grew. It started off for a weekend, and it's now runs for 9 days from the 16th to the 24th of October. But it's been fascinating to see the development of it. We started off in different venues in Wells. We were in churches and town hall and cafes and things like that. We then went into a huge marquee in the Bishop's Palace, which was very romantic, but slightly tricky, because if it was a windy evening or a raining evening, you felt it in the tent. You weren't quite sure whether it was going to take off or not. And then we decided to move to Cedars Hall, and they have got all the technology, so we don't have to worry about that, which is fabulous.
As well as that, we have our very own Michael Eavis popping down to talk with Chris Salmon about Glastonbury 50. So I think it's going to be somewhat of a big consolation prize for him to be with the community talking about his memories of the Glastonbury Festival.
So. I hope so. He's such a glorious character. He's with his bare ankles all the time, even in the frosty frost of winter. Oh, he's an amazing man, and his daughter is just as wonderful as he is. Emily's a good lady, and she's taken on the ethos of the festival, I'm sure, exactly as he wanted it to be.
You must be so busy that you have little time to catch up to see anything yourself, but if you could have one little sort of stowaway moment where you could dip behind stage and just listen to something from this year's festival, a hidden secret, not the obvious, is there one particular event you'd like to sort of sneak into?
It's very difficult. I can't choose one because there are so many different subjects that I want to know about. There's a guy talking about unconscious bias. Caroline Steele, who I've mentioned already, is going to say how food can save the world. She's getting a lot of publicity. She was on Radio 4 the other day. Our book group author is Max Porter, whose book was Radio 4's Book of the Month for June. Well, have you chosen a favourite? Have you had a look at the list and chosen a favourite?
That's a good question. I have. I mean, I think probably Michael Eavis will be the one for me, but probably Simon Armitage, just purely because of his love of poetry, books, and all people. He wants to bring literacy and reading to everybody, not just to those that already love books. So I think Simon Armitage for me. The Wells Literary Festival also provides educational needs and help to the community. I caught up with Bug McKaig, part of the educational team, to find out exactly what work they do for the local community.
I'm involved in the education team at the LitFest. Essentially, the Literary Festival has run for approximately 27 years now, and since its inception, it has always supported local education initiatives. So, for example, last year, the festival raised approximately £20,000, which went directly into local schools. And lots of projects benefiting children. And we worked with approximately 40 schools. And ultimately, I think our reach will have got to about 3,000 children, providing them with the extra inspiration and stimulation they need. Perhaps sometimes it's lacking or there isn't time within the school day, so it can give them a more rounded education. Our work is mainly involved with authors, poets, theatre trips, any activity that is sort of a literary nature and fits in well with the aims of the festival itself. Because we're essentially a festival for adults, not for children. There is a very impressive children's festival in Bath, and we don't overlap with that. So the work that we do is essentially all within schools and within the local community. We like being involved essentially with schools within the Wells area. A lot of the funding for the festival will come from local sponsors, local businesses in the Wells area, and a lot of the ticket buyers are from the Wells area. So we try to work within a 20 to 25 mile radius of the Wells area, and we work from nursery age up to sixth form. So the whole gamut, the whole age range. We've also run projects in special schools for children who attend special schools. We've done storytelling projects with them that are appropriate to their level. Last year we ran an infant event for year 1 and year 2 children. So if you're not sure of that age range, that would be 6-7-year-olds, with a superb author called Tracy Corduroy. Some of your listeners will be familiar with her work. She writes the Shifty McGifty stories, picture books, about a burglar dog and his sidekick, and they're actually bakers because they decide not to be burglars. So we ran an event in infant schools and we had approximately 400 children over the day. We also made sure that they all went home with the book. So we negotiate a discount with the publishers. So we're able to sell books to children for £2, £2 a copy for a brand new book. And this is all because of our sponsors and our ticket buyers who feed into the LitFest, who give us the money to spend in schools. In the past, we've also had, for the older range, we have had the poet Holly McNish, who was at Strode, who was fantastic, really hit the nail on the head with young people there. And we also had Tony Walsh, who some of you will remember from his poem, This Is the Place, which he stood on the Manchester Town Hall steps and read. He came down to Somerset for a week. We put him up and he visited about 15 local schools over that week, performing his poems, speaking to young people, talking about the inspiration for his poetry and making it accessible.
I asked Bug to describe to us some of the projects that the World Literary Festival's educational team have been most proud of.
We've been involved in an interesting project at Whitstone School in Shepton Mallet. They decided to regenerate the school magazine, the sort of thing we were all familiar with at school, where you would have a magazine delivered, a hard copy. And we were approached by the head of English there, Ewan Lappin-Cook, to help fund that. And the project, interestingly, and it was very good and informative, was run by the pupils, obviously with a bit of adult direction, but they decided on the input, they decided on what they wanted to write about. So they've been producing a hard copy school magazine once a term with items of local interest to all their pupils. And it was particularly pleasing for me because when I was teaching at a local primary school, I observed some of the articles of children who'd gone to Whitstone who'd I taught in my old school. So that was really satisfying to see that some of those children were still interested in writing in the transition time from primary to secondary school. I think one of the projects that the whole team would be proud of is our Year 6 event, which takes place during the Literary Festival itself. It started off as a one-day event with children from Year 6 and Year 5 in Welsh schools visiting the town hall to hear a speaker. It then grew to 2 days because I felt there was a need in the Glastonbury and street schools as well. So we had an author visit for 2 days, give a talk in the morning, talk in the afternoon. Then we were able to offer the children reduced price books after an incredibly engaging talk from an author, and all the authors for the last 5 years have commented on how engaged the children were. For us as an education team, the excitement was to see boys particularly jostling in the author queue to get the signature to buy not one copy but 3 copies of the author's book because they've been so impressed with actually meeting an author who they could relate to. We've had Ross Montgomery, Abby Elphinstone, Piers Torday, and last year we had the fantastic Maz Evans, who was a big personality and really took on board her audience, covered lots of issues that are things that worry children at the moment. Difficulties at home, difficulties in school, elements of things in school like bullying are addressed in some of the books, but also the adventure side and the resilience side of life that children enjoy being exposed to. I think the Year 6 event for us has been one of the key events of getting children to authors. And on top of that, what we've done is we also help the schools by funding the coach transport. It sounds a small thing, but funding a coach to bring children to an event. So for example, the children from St Paul's in Shepton Mallet had the coach funded for them, but not only did they go to the author event eventually at Cedars Hall, but they did a tour of Wells Cathedral, they went to the Bishop's Palace, they had their lunch there. So it became more than just our event. We've also been involved in funding a national literacy charity, which is now called Beanstalk, and they have branches in various places in the UK. And we realised that there was no base in the Southwest. So we enabled them to access extra funding. We gave them some funding, and they have set up down here. So we continue to support some local primary schools with reading helpers, which means that an adult will go into school twice a week and spend half an hour with a specific child twice a week enjoying books. This is not the reading scheme. It's not sounding out words. The children don't even have to read if they don't want to and they don't choose to. They can just discuss a book or hear a book read to them and talk about what they might enjoy. And the reading helper will have access to a large box of books. The child might say, I'm interested in pirates. They'll find them pirate stories. So it's about a dialogue and a love of literature rather than feeling they're decoding again, particularly children who struggle with reading. It's not about them decoding, trying to sound out the words. It's about actually enjoying and engaging with books on an entirely different level with no pressure. And I think that's a really valuable thing for young people.
You're listening to LibraryCast, brought to you from Somerset Libraries. And I'm with Bug McKaig, part of the education team, presenting their story to us about their work they do after the World Literary Festival has been completed. So I asked Bug McKaig what she would like to do in the long-term future if she had an aspiration for a project not yet realised.
One project we've run, and it is a realised project, but I'd like to extend it. We have an excellent relationship with a poet called A.F. Harold, who does poetry by post. And I'm particularly keen on postcards. And what he does is he sends a postcard once a week to a school with a poem on it, specifically to that class. And he does that for the whole term. So an excitement is built up amongst the children and the pupils. And then he'll do a visit and a whole day's poetry with that class and that school. So that's one project. I think from feedback from schools we've had, that's been a huge benefit. I think definitely more projects with older pupils, more projects with secondary sector pupils, more projects with the 16 to 18 group to keep them engaged in books, reading, and coming to talks, meeting more authors, particularly in areas they're interested in. Climate change is a big one. We had aspirations to organise various events to do with that. I know during the Literary Festival, Somerset Wildlife Trust have got an event on there, a panel event, which would be really interesting. I feel, for me, I think probably observing the children, the most pleasure they seem to get is actually meeting a real life poet or author, and that would be my aspiration for next year, is to get back to having more real life poetry authors. When Holly McNish went to Strode College and Crispin School attended, the delight amongst the audience of being treated like grown-ups but in a school environment was tangible. The way she spoke to them, the things she talked about, a lot of them, quite controversial areas, but they're interested. They were interested, they were engaged, and they related to her poetry. So I think at the older end of the spectrum is get more poets into school for older children.
I wanted to delve more into the Wells Festival's programme, so I asked Bug what she is going to, and thought I'd seek some inspiration from her.
One I would like to go to, I was really keen on the last event on the Saturday, which was Hashi Mohammed, People Like Us, what it takes to make it in modern Britain. He was a Somali immigrant and he came to the UK and he changed his life, and he's talking about his book and the impact of living here and what difference that's made to him, and now how he's become a successful barrister, how he helps people, how he views modern Britain, I think is really interesting for us. We live in an area that is it isn't a multi-ethnic area we live in generally. And I think projects like getting Hashi Mohammed, we funded a project of Bain books in a local school because they felt they needed to have more diversity for the children in their primary school. So I think someone like Hashi Mohammed would really tick my box at the LitFest. Also, one other author, if I may, is talk to you about, she wasn't actually in the brochure. Unfortunately, somebody dropped out, but it's Helen Taylor. And she is talking about her book, Why Women Read Fiction. And I think that would be a really interesting talk as well. She is just discussing how book groups, most literary festivals are attended by women, most book groups are run by women. She's just talking about the life of fiction within the female environment.
The Wells Festival of Literature starts on the 16th of October and runs through until the 24th of October. To find out more, visit their webpage, wellsfestivalofliterature.org.uk, where you can find a complete list of all the events both online and at Cedar Hall, and also how to book tickets. As well as that, you could look at the shortlist of the competitors in this year's poetry and story competitions. To find out more, visit their webpage. You've been listening to LibraryCast, brought to you by Somerset Libraries, bringing you libraries from home.